Well, I want to thank everybody for coming, definitely. It's good to see people here because that means you're interested in learning about, or at least hearing about philanthropy, volunteerism early in your career. That bodes well for the future, for giving back to the community. We're really excited to have the panelists we have here today who have experience both in pursuing their professional career, but also giving back to the communities that they live in. So really looking forward to that. My name is Jimmy. I'm a member of the Future Fund, which is a giving circle as a part of the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia. The Future Fund it's a group of young professionals that give an annual grant each year to a chosen topic. This year's was the environment, so we gave a grant to the Potomac Conservancy, which provides data to local conservancy groups to allow them to target their efforts to give the most impact. But every year we choose a different topic and we give to them. This year we chose the environment. We also have a series of events like this one, and then our third function is happy hours. We're pretty good at that, so pretty diversified. I want to thank very much Georgetown Law for acting as our hosts this evening and providing a very welcoming atmosphere for us, especially Krista Vita, who oh, there we go. Okay. Krista helped us out since the beginning. She's been very welcoming and very receptive to the idea, so we appreciate her. I also want to introduce to you Ricky White, who is the co-chair of the Education Committee. Ricky, through his network, helped to put together this panel. So without him, we wouldn't be able to sit here and talk together tonight. So thanks very much, Ricky.
Thanks, Jimmy. As Jimmy said, Ricky White, I have been part of the Future Fund probably first 5 or 6 years, and actually, way I was able to pull this together is actually 2 of the panelists are good friends of mine. One former boss, I guess, and then the other one, CT, who just gotten to know through the Future Fund. So we have two Future Fund alumni, and it's for young professionals, so don't let the gray and the beard confuse you. I'm actually only 23 years old. So anyway, I'm here. We're not going to do long introductions. We decided that we'd let the moderator and the panelists introduce themselves, but I just want to reiterate from the Future Fund's perspective, we're very appreciative of Georgetown Law, Krista, everything she's done, as well as Gene Finn, who is our moderator, and I'll do a brief intro just to say who he is, and then he can expand upon kind of both his professional and philanthropic background. So Gene is the Chief Development Officer and Assistant Dean of Development and Alumni Affairs here at Georgetown University Law Center, and he's been here a little over a year, and we appreciate him taking the time this evening to moderate this panel. So Gene, I'll turn it over to you to kind of give your background and introduce everybody else.
Welcome, everyone, and I guess we would have the only night of winter for you guys to come out, so that was not part of the planning. But welcome to Georgetown Law Center. We're actually very excited to host this. For those of you who may not be familiar with Georgetown Law, we're the largest law school in the country. We have the largest number of students, and we also have the largest alumni population. So that enables us to do a lot of socially dedicated programs. And we do a lot of work here in the city with low-income populations, and we have a very strong volunteer base here at the Law Center. So I think it was very appropriate for us to host this type of event to talk about how to get more engaged in volunteer activities and philanthropy. So we're thrilled you're here. My background, as Ricky said, is I've been here for a year, and just over a year. Washington had a special place for me. I spent 15 years at GW in advancement. And then I went on to Kent State in Ohio, where I was vice president of development there for about 8 years. And then most recently, I was at Columbia up in New York. But when the opportunity came to come back to Washington and to work for Georgetown, I jumped at it because it's a terrific place. So I'm very pleased to be able to to facilitate this discussion. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to facilitate it. It's the panelists that have the hard job today. And what we thought we'd do is just give them a chance to introduce themselves. And maybe we can start with Julie Simmons. She's Managing Director in Human Capital Strategic Consulting.
I love a microphone. So this is just, we could stop right here. My life has been fulfilled at this point. I'm the Managing Director of Human Capital Strategic Consulting. We provide outsourced HR solutions to organizations that are interested in flexible human resources help. So we work with organizations between 100 and 500 employees, and we provide strategic and tactical HR leadership. So is that what we want to talk about? What else do I need to say? I don't know. Personally, I'm married. I have 5.5-year-old boy-girl twins. I love philanthropy. I love talking about philanthropy. I love inspiring philanthropists.
That's perfect.
And I'm glad to be here.
We'll get more into the volunteer activities as we move on. And next we have Rich LaFleur. He's a partner with Grant Thornton. So, Rich?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everybody. A few colleagues here, which is always good to see. As he mentioned, I'm a partner with Grant Thornton. I've been with the firm coming up on 34 years, so I've been with the firm longer than most of you guys have been alive, I know, and have served in a number of different positions. I've really been blessed by the roles I've been given by the firm, which have included being the managing partner of our practice here in the Mid-Atlantic for 15 years. I have my dream job right now in that I'm back to being an auditor by trade, but I do quite a bit of work in the community, and I try to coach and point our people towards the community in my role as partner in charge of what we call markets and industries. So I too have two quote kids, but they're about your age, 29 and 26. So I'm living, kind of know what you guys are thinking, at least through that lens. My wife and I, Janet, have been married for coming up on 34 years as well. Have worked and lived my entire career here in this community. Grew up in Texas, but moved here back in the 70s when my dad was transferred within his company. So went away to Ohio to go to school. I mentioned earlier that I went to Miami University. And I too am just passionate about this topic and look forward to sharing some views from the business world about philanthropy and why it makes sense for you personally and why for the firms and companies you work for, why it makes sense there too.
Thank you. And C.T. Thomas Jr., he's Program Manager for Altamira Technologies. So, C.T.
So, good evening, everybody. So, Charles Thomas, CT is what I go by. I work for Altamira doing program management, teach at the University of Maryland, organizational behavior. I'm the chair of the board for OAR Fairfax, and we'll talk about that later. And then I also teach in the jails, so I'm really engaged in community service. It's near and dear to me, so it's pretty cool. And to tell you a quick story, Ricky is talking about gray hair. In October, my daughter says to me, "Daddy, grow your beard so you can be a lumberjack for Halloween." So as I grew it, she started to see some gray hairs, and she walks up to me one day and she says, "Daddy, I see you with the wisdom." So now I'm just trying to get more wisdom. So that's what I'm letting her out.
That's great.
Might be very gray by the end of the evening, so that'll be good. That'll be good. Because this is really focused on how to get you involved in volunteering and get active with boards, I thought it might help just a little bit to give a little statistics on the potential power of your generations, how you can really contribute to society. And I pulled up and I'm just going to very, very quickly, I just wanted to share this with you. The Gen X population, as you know, 1965 to 1980, that's 66 million Americans. That's 26% of our population. The millennials, which is 1981 to 1997, there's 75 million, largest now, larger than the baby boom population. Their giving is interesting. The Gen X, they give about 19% of all gifts made in the U.S. in any given year. The millennials right now, they give about 10%. So there's great potential there. But something that I thought was of particular interest, there was a study that was done very recently, and the Gen X population, the millennials, think that they can have the greatest societal impact through volunteering. of any of the other generations. The 37.4% of the Generation X and millennials versus just 28% of the baby boomers. So they really feel that through volunteering, they can have some real impact on society. So you can see with those types of numbers in society, what kind of impact that can have. And with giving, it's the same way, because philanthropy is very, very near and dear to my heart. The two youngest generations, they plan on over the next several years to increase their charitable giving by the greatest percentage. 43% plan on giving more. And that versus just 24% of baby boomers intend on giving more. So the combination of volunteering and philanthropy for those two generations, which this room is made up of, is really significant. So with that background and sort of that as a basis, I think we could dive into a discussion on how we can get more involved and how important it is. So I have a series of a few questions, and then when the panel discusses them, we'll open up for questions from the group. The first one, and I won't pick anyone, you guys can volunteer, but maybe you could talk a little bit about how you choose an organization or how you have chosen an organization that you want to be involved with and support, and draw on your experiences from the past.
Ladies first.
Rock, paper, scissors, you want me to go? Okay.
I'll pick one of you.
No, I'll go. I think it's really important. I think initially, sort of a lot of people's approach is shiny object, whatever attracts my attention. Is there an opportunity with my organization? Is it just someone who knows someone, and so I'll come to this thing tonight because there's going to be open bar and free food, which is a perfectly acceptable reason. But I think as you continue to strategically examine where you spend your time, it's important to figure out what your personal and professional goals are, and how can you align yourself with organizations that support either your values or your vision. Surround yourself with people who have sort of either divergent views or are going to give you the platform to meet people that you may not otherwise have the occasion to meet. So for me, and there were several people in my career who sort of helped me to figure out what kind of my platform was relative to my professional endeavors and then my personal passions. So once I kind of narrowed down my 3 pillars of how I want to spend my time, which were sort of local community impact, higher education, and then workforce development. Obviously in HR, I feel passionately about workforce development. That's kind of my professional. Higher education, I feel like that's really a way to unlock access in this country is through higher education. And then really around my community, it was through things like the Future Fund that gave me the opportunity to really develop local connections. So I would just encourage you to think about what personally motivates you, whether it's animals. I have a good friend that's really involved in animal rights, and she wants to shelter dogs and do this whole, adoption thing, and she has land, and so that makes a lot of sense for her passions. So just be thoughtful about what is interesting to you, because, your work may be a great way to fulfill you, but I would challenge you to also find ways outside of work to sort of scratch that itch around fulfillment. So, and hopefully there's some intersection between work and philanthropy, because then you're going to have opportunities to meet people outside of your organization, your current state, if you will.
So I guess I got into the world of philanthropy in 2 ways. One was through a client relationship where the CEO of my largest client at the time, this was probably back in the late 90s, had a daughter with cystic fibrosis. And she was also, I'm going to date myself a little bit music-wise here, she was a huge Dixie Chicks fan. And so I took Don Wood and his daughter Rachel and their mom/wife to a Dixie Chicks concert when Rachel was 4, and started to learn more about what cystic fibrosis is and what it does to children. And at that time, the average expectancy of a child with cystic fibrosis was something like 20 or 25 years old. And so via a client relationship, something that was important to my client became important to me. And I've now seen Rachel grow up to be just a fantastic young lady with a life expectancy of like 50 or 60 years old. So that's one journey. The other I really just fell into and was led to by my firm, which I'll get into a little bit later as to why we give back. But I was introduced about 3 or 4 years into being a managing partner to Junior Achievement, which I've got some literature out there on the table if you want to look at it. Junior Achievement is all about financial literacy and work readiness and entrepreneurship focused on our youth. And I'm a believer, and have become more of a believer over the last 12 years, that unlocking our kids' future is the way to prosperity in this country. And when you think about the fact that I think the number is like 40% of middle school age and high school age students in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is the 3rd or 4th most affluent county in the United States, are on assistance for meals. It's eye-opening. That interest in financial literacy just aligns with what I think an accounting firm should be known for. You know, we're accountants. We should be. So there's that, and it's just been really fulfilling from that standpoint. And there's a great opportunity for all of you guys. There's a plug to volunteer through the various JA and a day activities where you can go in and work in a classroom. So most of the folks that have been with Grant Thornton maybe have done that once when they were an intern or a staff. And then we've built 2 finance park facilities, one in Prince George's County and one in Fairfax County. We've broken ground on one in Montgomery County. And knock on wood, in 5 years, we will build one of those in DC. And that's a facility where students go through a whole day-long program to build their own budget, and they're given a life situation. And it's just an eye-opening experience to serve in those type of environments. And I'll give you some statistics later if you want them. They're in this impact brochure and so forth. So I was pulled into that because of my role in the firm and the fact that I identified with that organization as being strategic to us. But it's had a pretty powerful impact on me personally. So.
And for me, I think when you're trying to figure out an organization to which you should engage, I'm not really a process-oriented guy, but I ask myself a lot of questions before I make a decision on how to proceed, right? So I think the first question you want to ask yourself when you're thinking about an organization is, do you have the sustainable energy to engage, right? Because it shouldn't be a resume building exercise. It should be you offer all of you for however long you can to that particular organization. So that's point A, can I offer sustainable energy? Number 2, you want to make sure that your aptitudes and abilities align, right? Does it allow you to be the best you can be at whatever that you're trying to do at that chosen time? Number 3, you have to ask yourself, or at least I ask myself, what is my potential impact factor to this organization? Take, for example, and we'll talk about this more in detail shortly, when I teach in the jails, it's more of my cousins didn't have anybody like me when I was growing up. My friends didn't have anybody like us. So if you don't have somebody that you can model outside of drug dealers, killers, athletes, and entertainers, how do you play, right? And then the 4th thing that I think you need to ask yourself is, when you engage in this organization, what skills can you learn to help you get your next job, right? So if that means you want to work on marketing, or you work on leadership or governance or salesmanship, whatever it may be, if you do those 4 things, and particularly the first one, right, having that sustainable energy, for me, it's helped me align myself to different organizations where I think that I can offer some value, and then in turn help me get to wherever I think that next lily pad hop is. So those are, I think, the 4 steps that have proven beneficial to me when I'm trying to figure out different organizations, and it's worked so far. So we'll see. What happens.
Thank you. CT just touched on something that I want to turn the panel's attention to next, which is the benefits of volunteering. I know, obviously, we know that the work we do and the philanthropy and the donations we make benefit the organization, but what about the personal side of volunteering? And because of your depth, each of you with your depth with the organizations, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of the benefits on a personal level, a professional level, and sort of business level as well. If you wouldn't mind sharing that.
Same order?
No, you go I talk and then you have all the good answers.
So the why get involved personally is, I think, the most powerful part of this discussion. There's a business side of this and so forth, but I would encourage you guys to go onto YouTube and pull up use the quote, "the business of happiness." Just put that in, and you'll be pulled to a video shot of Ted Leonsis speaking at University of Maryland. Sorry about that. Back in 2011 when he first came out with his book, and he talks about a reckoning that he had as an individual. I've heard him tell the story. He's a client, by the way. I like my clients. He tells a story about being in a plane that was going down and how freaked out everybody was and how freaked out he was and how unfulfilled he felt as a person. And so he wrote down a few things that day, and they survived, obviously. And then he started to really do a lot of research and become passionate about happiness and what makes a person fulfilled as a human being. And since then, he directs every single thing he does towards what he refers to as a double bottom line, which is the bottom line of the Wizards and Capitals and the Verizon Center. That's important from a business standpoint. But what is equally important is how happy he makes fans, how happy he makes the people that work with him and for him. And he talks on this video about, you know, there are 5 pillars around feeling fulfilled from the standpoint of a leader. And one of them is thinking in terms of we, not I. Another is just being involved in the community and so forth, because people are generally social. I mean, that's why social media is so popular, is it gives us a way to connect with other people because that's fulfilling to us. And there's comments around the power of being empathetic and being communicative, but there are just tons of studies out there that including one, by the way, if you ever wanted to pull up a good book, another plug, Bob Rosen on Grounded. The last of the five traits of being happy is this is going to sound sappy, but it's actually having a higher calling. It's having a purpose in your life that makes you grounded. And there's a whole chapter in this book about that. And the payback that being happy and being content is that odds on you're going to be a better professional. You're going to go further in your career, you're going to be a better leader, because naturally you will more undoubtedly inspire people through your happiness and how fulfilled you are by what you do in the community. So, long-winded answer, but just a very powerful 55-minute video, and something that it kind of galvanized. When I read that book and heard him speak about this now 6 years ago, it kind of galvanized in my mind, 25 years into my career, why giving back to the community made me feel good personally, and really reflect on how that translates into being an effective leader.
So for me, I think it's a huge lift in your personal life. How many of y'all know who Dr. Thomas J. Stanley is, who wrote the books The Millionaire Next Door and The Millionaire Mind? So to piggyback off what Rich was saying, Ted Leonsis says it's we versus I, we instead of I.
Yeah, don't think I, think we.
Don't think I, think we. So in this book, Dr. Thomas Stanley says me is dull, 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 right? And I think it's very true. So when you think about the collective spirit of what goes on out here in the world, there's so many social issues, so many academic, issues that go on in this world where if we stay within our own little space, we don't offer any value to anybody else, right? So I think when we go out, when you join organizations like the Future Fund or Teaching the Jails or Leadership Fairfax or pick an organization, you get an opportunity to learn from so many different people that you never would have encountered, right? I'll have some decisions that I'm going through as I think through stuff, and the guys in jail, I'm like, if you were me, what would you do? Right? Because that collective intelligence, that networked intelligence is so very powerful. Like when I'm at home by myself, I have my wife to talk to who's always busy doing something, or you have a 10-year-old and a 15-month-old, they can't really help me, right? So when you get other adults, even though, because I still think that we're very like-minded, they just happen to get caught doing what they were doing, right? many of us in this room has done some things that if we got caught by the police, I know I'll speak for myself, you likely wouldn't be here. So I think the personal parts of engaging in philanthropic and civic engagement efforts, it allows you to learn something and be exposed to things that you never would have saw before. I didn't even know boards existed, until I was like about 29, and I had no idea how you even get involved in something until, well, I was in Leadership Fairfax, and the owner came and talked to us about how to get on nonprofit boards. I had no idea how you even did something like that. And through that type of stuff, I ended up meeting Ricky and Julie and Marcy and Matt and all these people. So I think it expands your network, and now you get an opportunity to see people who are doing things that you want to do, and then can guide you along the way. So I think from my journey and what I've learned, my parents always used to say growing up, it's nice to be important, but more important to be nice. So I think when you can offer some value to people and try, and I don't know what your religious orientations are, but with whatever talent God has given you, you need to completely use them by the time your clock expires, to use a sports analogy. So for me, I think it's the personal elements that you get from it, you can't take it away. And then you get an opportunity to get some skills that prepares you for whatever it is you want to do next. Your turn.
It's better to go first or last. I don't think I should be in the audience. I'm nodding, taking notes. I mean, I agree. I think there's the intrinsic value. There's also, I think, for me, it's very much what can I do? How can I live my higher calling? How can I make sure I'm leaving a legacy is really important in terms of, I don't have the money to give to Georgetown Law, but I'd like to be able to find a way to have an impact and to increase my impact through other people. And so for me, it became very clear that surrounding myself with like-minded people who are interested in impacting positive change in my sort of block, and whatever block I'm on at whatever time is really what's meaningful to me and what I look for and what I get out of it. I just want to, literally, it sounds naive, make the world a better place when I go to bed at night than when I woke up to it. It sounds super naive, but that's, some days it's glorious and some days it's not, but, you always feel better about what you've done that day, so.
I think it's interesting when we talked a couple weeks ago about the program tonight, and we talked about personal, professional, business. I don't know if you noticed, they really didn't talk about professional. They talked more about the personal rewards of volunteering. And I can tell you, I'm coming up on nearly 30 years working for colleges and universities. I don't know where the time went, but and I've worked all of that time with volunteer boards, boards of trustees, advisory boards, alumni boards. And I've seen different types of volunteers in my time, and I have to tell you that we versus the I really stands out, because the ones that stand the test of time on these boards, that stay on these boards for a while and eventually make pretty significant philanthropic contributions, it's about the we. And they're there for the betterment of the particular college or university. The ones that come on that you find out pretty quickly are there for their own self-interest. They don't stay very long. Because it's either not what they expected, or they're not getting that feeling that you get from volunteering. So
Just a follow-up comment on that?
Yeah, please.
I mean, I've run across those who use philanthropy, I think, the wrong way. So I've seen, and maybe you guys can sense this, is that I think there are people who are very successful who believe that by giving, that makes them happier and makes them more fulfilled. But if they're not involved in it personally, really from the heart, they're still not happy. They can put their name on a building, and they can put their name on a contribution, or they'll lead a capital campaign or whatever, but I still don't sense that sometimes, just to follow up on this. Yeah. It's still I, even though they want it to be we, but because I don't think they've really internalized this enough. And really, they're just still not fulfilled, which I've always found to be an interesting equation.
You've touched on something. From my perspective in the profession, I have the most fun working with donors who are engaged on a significant volunteer level with the college or university. They're on a board, and they mentor students, they meet faculty, And when it's time for them to make the gift, they're doing it with such joy to give back that you're 100% correct. And then I've also worked with the donors who they have an interest in seeing their name on something. And the joy just isn't there, quite frankly. It's interesting to see. So you've absolutely hit on something. And I think that, you're all, too young to be worrying about making large gifts just yet. But eventually, as you get involved with these organizations and move through, it is a natural process. And that's where significant volunteering leads to.
And I want to offer one more thing, too. I'm an avid reader, and one of the things that really captured me even from an early age is this author, this writer by the name of Etienne de Grelais. And the quote that he says is, "I shall pass this way but once. Any good, therefore, any good that I can do or any kindness that I can show to another human being, let me do it now. Let me neither defer nor neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again." Right? Marcus Aurelius says, many of us live as if we have 1,000 years to live. Right? And it's not true. There needs to be a sense of urgency that says, I need to engage, I need to play at whatever level I can play it for as long as I'm here, because when I can't play anymore, I can't play anymore. So I think, to piggyback off what, Rich and Julie were saying, that personal connection part to it, let me do it now, let me neither defer nor neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. To me, that's very much a clarion call that says, I can't be mad at you for long, because what if I never see you again? What if I don't get a chance to apologize? So for me, I think it's important to, when you have these opportunities to offer value, do it. Don't look back. Have fun. If you mess up, so what? But then the fact of the matter is, when it's all said and done, when you're laying on your deathbed that day, nobody will ever be able to look at you and say you didn't try. So that's what I think it does for me personally.
Now that you've talked a little bit about sort of the personal benefits from it, I'm wondering if we could turn a little to some concrete suggestions for the group about how do you get involved with an organization that you might have an interest in or a personal interest, and maybe you can talk about your own personal journey with one of the boards you've been on.
You want to start, TT?
I don't like patterns, so that if I did, that so you can go.
If you don't like patterns, thinking through what you said. So, I think, again, what attracts your interest, right? Figure out what it is that you're interested in. There's, how many of you are involved right now with the philanthropic organization? Show of hands. Okay, so I bet there's 25 organizations that are represented just in this room. So figure out what it is that you like to do. And for me, shocker, I like people. So I need to go to things where there are going to be people and where I'm going to find someone who can come with me and I'm going to be able to engage and build relationships. That's really important to me. So I would just try to identify what organization it is, whether it's the Future Fund. For me, when we started the Future Fund 7 years ago, the draw was like-minded professionals in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So how could I expand my professional personal network and collectively give? I still don't have a lot of financial means to donate and to contribute, but I have a lot of time and energy, and so and a desire to educate and learn. And so for me, it was what organization either reflects that, which there wasn't in the landscape, which is why we started the Future Fund, or identify junior achievement. I think that financial literacy is incredibly important. And so for me, I had the benefit of being raised in a house where financial literacy was talked about, and so I can't imagine not understanding how to, put money in your 401k from your first paycheck and all that good stuff. So figure out what it is that you relate to and just volunteer for the day, or just, here's a baby step, subscribe to their newsletter. Learn about them. And it can be very passive, but figure out what speaks to you. And there's so many ways to just show up and go to something. And I think now, especially through LinkedIn, I would be unabashedly curious and figure out who is putting on their LinkedIn profile. And if you don't have something on your LinkedIn profile because you don't think it's cool or whatever, I would challenge you to change that, because that's how connections are made. And so you're going to find somebody who's on a board, who's involved, and that's a great way to just sort of learn about an organization. I mean, Rich introduced me to 3 organizations that I'm still involved with, and it was because, yeah. I don't like to tell him, because then, he feels good, and we don't want that. But, so, find someone who you can learn from and who you really feel like shares some values with you, and leverage that network and figure out, and it doesn't have, I don't want to make it, you have to go start a, nonprofit, but, figure out what's comfortable for you and just do that one or two things, right? And does anyone do bullet journals? I just found out about bullet journaling. Does anyone do that? Okay. I am, in addition to the YouTube video on Ted Leonsis, I am also going to recommend a YouTube video on bullet journaling, and I think I'm a pretty organized person. It changed my life. So if you are not bullet journaling, highly recommend it. You will be so much more productive, and I thought I was productive before, Rich. You would have no idea. But just figure out one or two things that you can do and incorporate it into, your world, and just learn. Just be curious. People love curiosity. And if they're not open to your curiosity, you don't want to hang out with them. You don't want to participate with them.
What is bullet journal?
Yeah. I was
Okay,
gonna
it's
add-
amazing. Do you want to explain it? Because I'm
I'll let
probably.
you.
No, I
It's-
insist.
it's-
They've heard from me too much.
It's basically a productivity system, using whatever notebook you want, but you kind of customize it to where you want it to work, where you can do squares for like doing tasks in it. You set up weekly reviews for yourself to how do you plan out your week, how you plan out your month, how you plan out your day. And it's just really a task management system to keep yourself on track. And I think it's become like, I want to say, it's basically like a cult. If you're familiar with David Allen.
In a good way.
You'll find various
What a cult.
Facebook groups,
I love it.
you'll find various people, they're showing off their bullet journals, using like big moleskin.
Some of them look really, really a lot better. I'm very basic. But what it does is I thought I was a highly productive, organized person, but it really does force you to prioritize and organize your thoughts and your actions in a way that is fun and creative. And I think that if you say, okay, I want to get more involved in philanthropy because you're here tonight, or I don't know why you'd be here, I think that's the reason why you're here. Figure out, do one task, research an organization, and figure out a way to incorporate that into your own organizational system. But I'm telling you, bullet journaling will change your life. And I'm not a member of the cult. It's not, what is it, Scientology? It's not affiliated with Scientology. This might get banned. I'm sure someone's going to be smiling at me.
Ask the question one more time.
I've already gone off topic.
Yeah, I'm not using the bullet journal, sorry.
Sort of picking an organization, getting involved with an organization, how you do it, and what you how you approach them and get involved.
Well, I think as I'm the chairman of the board over at OAR, so when I think of the people who come to us who want to get involved, it's really, piggybacking on what Julie said, there's a level of curiosity there. There's a level of connectedness to the mission and the vast majority of people, if you're telling them you're willing to do something for free, they're not going to be like, no. When people try to come to us and they say, I've read your website and there's this element I want to get into, be on the fundraising committee or marketing committee or advocacy committee or anything like that, there's a level of, you've shown the interest, so I think, to piggyback on Julie again, taking these baby steps, because sometimes what we've seen is some people, they'll go and try to do 5, 6, 7 boards all at once. And then the problem is when you have this civic orientation where you want to help, sometimes you'll spread yourself too thin. So I think if you have to laser focus in early on and say, I want to do that. Then once you get that, once that becomes pretty easy for you, then you can move on to something else and really grow. So to me, it's like Nike, right? Just do it. It's a very simple process. Pick up the phone, call somebody if you don't know. Go by there because they're willing to have the conversations. And the vast majority of the people, based on my experiences, are going to be willing to let you engage. Maybe not be on the executive committee right away, but if you're willing to show that sustainable energy and kind of climb and walk, it should be a relatively easy and helpful process for you and that organization.
Picking up on that thought, one mistake I think a lot of young professionals make is pick up on this phrase of getting on a board and expect that that's the first step. I would suggest that just volunteering is the first step. Find a committee, find a way to volunteer. I mean, selfishly, from a JA perspective, That's why JA works so well, is that any one of you could go out to any of the 2 finance parks and volunteer from 8 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon by helping these kids go through this day of putting a budget together. You know, from that volunteerism, you connect with people in the organization, and if you keep your energy level up and you're consistent and you really become passionate about it, that gets seen, and then you get invited to do things. You get invited to be on a Montgomery County Advisory Board or a committee or something like that. I mean, the first organization I was involved in was probably, you know, I was 4 or 5 years into my career. I started going to Technology Council of Maryland events, and it took probably 10 years before I was on that board. But and I would do things like put together the annual, you know, awards gala, that kind of thing. I still do that with other organizations because of what I learned way back then. But I didn't have that aspiration at the time to be on the board. I just wanted to get involved in something and start to get networked and feel good about what I was doing, have a little bit of fun other than doing functionally what I do as an auditor, to be honest, too. So getting onto a board is extremely difficult. It's not something that you just kind of say, I like that organization, can I be on your board? By the way, it usually comes with the need to cut a check. So unless you've got $5,000 sitting on the sidelines somewhere that you want to part ways with, getting on a board is something, if you don't have it personally, you're going to need your firm's backing for. So that's quite a leap. So.
I think the other thing to do is if you try it and it doesn't work out, don't be embarrassed about saying this isn't for me and I'm going to find something else to do. I think I get very caught up in, you know, making this successful and I should love this and, you know, animal rescue should be my cause. And I mean, animals are great, they're not my jam. So like that wouldn't work for me. And so you have to kind of figure out and be willing to say, you know, look, I fulfilled my commitment, you know, I'm interested in this, but I've got other obligations that I'm interested in pursuing as well. Don't be, I think as an organizational leader, you want people who are engaged, but you also want people who know their limits. And if it's not interesting to you, then don't be afraid to move on to something else, because then it becomes a burden and then you're not excited about it and then you don't do it, and that's no fun for anybody. Realist here. Realist.
But in fact, so you've touched on something that I think is important, and we're here to learn how to potentially get on, you know, volunteer for organizations and potentially get on boards. So we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but it is relevant to this. And I've noticed in my experience when I recruit for board members, university board members, part of it is giving. You know, most of the boards that I've managed have philanthropy as a key component of responsibilities. But the best volunteers are the ones that when I'm talking to them about potentially joining, they want to know exactly what the time commitment is and what the responsibilities and expectations are. And I'm wondering if our panel could talk a little bit about the responsibilities of being not just a volunteer, but eventually on a board, and what those expectations, because I think you have to be realistic about that when you're looking to serve.
I'll go first this time. Do you have on Dallas Cowboys cufflinks?
I do.
Do I need to sit between you two? Do I need
Yeah, that was.
conflict resolution? That's a really important.
It is.
You're at a law school,
Diversity.
so we'll have to be careful here.
Diversity.
That's fair. That's fair. So I think when you think about the time commitment of boards, I think it depends on how you jump in, right? So in my experiences, you know, I came in as a foot soldier. You know, I would go in, I would teach classes in the jail. So every week, week in, week out, that I would be there. But that was very much known to me up front. I would ask, like, how long are classes? You know, the first class, it takes an hour to prepare. Then you go in, teach for an hour and a half, then you go home. But then once you get used to it, the timing gets easier. But then once you move from the volunteer with Leadership Fairfax or Future Funder or whatever organization, Make-A-Wish Foundation, when you're at the volunteer level, it's how much you want to engage for the most part, unless you're on some type of strict cadence. Then I think once you jump to the board level, it can be relatively painless if you're a regular board member, not to minimize that, a regular board member as opposed to a executive committee board member. For us, we meet every other month, roughly. So for about 2.5 hours, and there's not a lot of necessary preparation time external to understanding what the different committees are doing, if that's marketing, advocacy, the finance committee, because you always have the fiduciary responsibilities to say, I understand mechanistically where we are from a financial perspective, and if we start to lose money, how do we re-engage? Because technically, that's on you. If your organization gets ready to go under, the board has to keep it afloat. At least that's what I understand from our bylaws. Then once you get on the executive committee, from my experiences, it gets a little bit more intense depending on the committee that you're on. If you're on a marketing committee or a fundraising committee, particularly as you get closer to an event, you're probably meeting a couple of times a week, to make sure, are we on track? Is the event is going to be right? Do we have enough people? Do we have sponsors? Do we have whatever? And then once you jump to, the treasurer, secretary, vice chair, chair, then you have to really have an understanding of what the organization does holistically. So that, to me, is, once you jump there, then you really have to engage. You have to have relationships with the executive director and all of that type of stuff, and that takes more time. But again, I think it goes back to my initial statement. If you have that sustainable energy, it's not that big of a deal, right? Because yeah, it'll take some time away, but if you're not going to be doing anything else anyway, but even at that point, you're spending, I don't know, 5-7 hours a month maybe. So it's really not that hard to, once you really engage, once you put it on your calendar. If you do bullet journaling where you already have it captured, you know what's coming.
Don't mock the bullet
No,
journal.
I'm not. I'm serious.
I'm going to convince you
I'm serious.
of the bullet journal.
Right.
We'll have a bullet journal tutorial shortly.
Right. See, I have my own little board at home too, right? Like our little Kanban boards. So it's very similar to bullet journaling. I love it. So congratulations to you two for bullet journaling. But yeah, I mean, but
Bring him
seriously.
out of the room.
He left, his bullet
Scared
journal
him.
must have told him he had to.
He's going to work. He's got stuff to do.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, on 5, 7, maybe 10 hours max a month. And that depends on how engaged you are as a person. And then that can vary depending on different events and all that. But that's been my experience. I don't know if you guys are different, but it's definitely doable, and it's not enough to prevent you from trying. That's what I think.
There's really, that's very well put. There's not too much I really have to add to that. I mean, there are tiers to this. There's the volunteer aspects of it. When you're on a board, most charitable boards meet quarterly. Most executive committees of the board, which is a subset where all the real work gets done, they meet monthly. If you're on a committee to put on an event, that could be, very frequent. It's just going to be a function of what you choose to do. I mean, if you're the treasurer, to your point, you've got kind of the business model of that nonprofit organization in your hands. So that could be thinking about it almost daily. So it'll vary based upon your role and how you get committed. I've rarely found that the time commitment really ever becomes an issue if it's something, to Julie's point, that you're really passionate about, and you're having fun with it, and you like the people that you're with. Then you make the time, and it just comes more naturally to you.
I do think, I agree. I think I think as you move from a general member to a committee member to a board member to a executive committee member, your time increases. I also think it's just important to think about your personal obligations, your career obligations, and when you'll be ready, and your professional career can provide you the flexibility that it may take to be involved in some of these organizations, because that may not be the same for an accountant as it is for an HR person, as it is for a salesperson. So it helps when you have the support of your supervisors and your peers and your leadership team at your organization, because then when you say, I'm not going to be until 10 because I have a board meeting, they don't roll their eyes at you. So I just want to caveat that, is that if it is something that dovetails nicely with work, it's sort of an easier ask if those meetings take place during the workday, which a lot of them do. And then you overlay personal life, and you got a whole nother layer of when the timing is right for that.
Something that CT said about 5 to 7 hours a month, and it reminded me, some of those statistics I shared with you earlier I pulled from various areas, but one was a Chronicle of Philanthropy article, which I would encourage you all to read. that talked about Generation X. And they're at that age right now where they're well into their careers, and so they're dedicating a lot of time to volunteerism and philanthropy. But it talked about how they have so many different demands on their lives, and they interviewed quite a few people in the article, all of whom said they've made some mistakes along the way with volunteering. One is they volunteered for too many organizations. So if you think about 5 to 7 hours a month for one organization, if you're on 4, and then all of a sudden you're adding those hours up. So I would encourage you to be, as we talked earlier on, pick your passion and focus on that as your initial volunteer, because otherwise it can get overwhelming. And we've all worked with volunteers who they join and we don't see them for 2 years because they're, have too much going on. So I would just caution you on that a little bit. Before we, I want to save some time for questions from you, but before we do that, because I am the Chief Development Officer here, I did want to finish up on a note on philanthropy. And I am curious to hear from the panel members about, as they got involved with these groups, what the expectation was, if the expectation was well-defined by the organizations. If not, how did that develop over time as far as philanthropic commitments to the organization? And if you haven't done it yourself, do you see that as a, as a challenge going forward?
So you're speaking mainly of the financial investment
Yes,
that's
exactly.
required?
Yeah.
I would say on most well-run and well-organized boards, there's actually a board acknowledgement agreement that you look at and sign once a year that will have that level of expectation set up in it. And it's going to range anywhere from, say, $300 to $500 on the low end to $3,000 to $5,000 probably on the high end. So I would also say that most organizations, not just charitable, but business organizations as well, have created these levels of partner status, which typically somewhere in the $15,000 to $20,000 range, that if your firm is giving that much, you'll get some kind of elevated status on the website, you'll get access to more events, you'll get much more pull when it comes to finding ways for your people to get involved and so forth. So beyond that, when you get into true, like for instance, cystic fibrosis, really probably to be on that fundraising board when I was on it, it's a $5,000 or $10,000 a year commitment. And so it's got to be important not just for you, but if you have a spouse, it better be important to them. Because I know my wife doesn't like giving money away very easily, but so I got her passionate about it. She knows Rachel would as well. And it made it part of the whole package. So.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely echo the remarks around expectations. I also think, so aside from the financial commitment and understanding what your expectations are in terms of the day-to-day responsibilities, I think it's important to understand what the leadership or the vision of that organization is for the term that you're going to be with them. So I was approached almost 2 years ago about joining the Community Foundation board, and the incoming president, took me to lunch, and the president of the chairman of the board, and then the president of the organization, who are kind of the leaders, took me to lunch. We had this conversation, and I, understood that I represented a demographic and a seat that they wanted to be filled by me. And I said, well, look, I just, need you to know that I'm not going to just sit on this board and sign my name and approve. Like, I'm actually want a voice, and I wanted to make sure that my style in terms of wanting to be a part of this organization was acceptable to the chairman, because if not, it was going to be a waste of his time, and it certainly was going to be a waste of my time. And I knew chemistry-wise, if it wasn't going to work, then let's just not waste anyone's time. And he was very open and candid and was grateful for that. And I think since then, the 2 years I've been on the board, he kind of chuckles, but I'm not, a shrinking violet in the back of the room. And so shocking. But I wanted to make sure that was something that, expectation that was set, because otherwise I don't want to waste my time or theirs. And so I would just encourage you, as you're continuing to evaluate organizations, make sure that you are getting something and are able to contribute in a way that is meaningful to you. And that may not be at every organization, and that's okay, that's actually good. But just don't be afraid to find your voice and figure out how to make that appropriate in that environment.
Don't leave yet tonight until I have a chance to ask you to be on one of my boards, please.
I'm not sure I have enough money, but I'd love to.
And my journey has been very similar. But when I engage with the board, I'll tell them up front, like, hey, number one, I owe Sally Mae $4 billion. So
Not 4 billion.
yeah, close. But I also happen to, I talked about earlier aligning your aptitudes and abilities. I happen to have the ability and aptitude to educate. So a lot of times, if I can't give, $5,000, I can teach all of your courses. Right, so if I'm going to teach, so now when you have those in-kind donations, because if you don't have me, you're paying somebody else $1,000 a class or whatever, or you can get somebody like me who understands classroom management, all of those things. So I think there's a way to engage at that level as well to say, hey, I might not be able to give you $1,000 this year, however, I can teach 10 classes, which equates to more than that. So I mean, a lot of times there is that element of writing a check, but I think you have to be resourceful and use whatever you have to say, hey, here's the value that I offer you from an in-kind donation. If you need your website built, monitored, maintained for an entire year, that's going to cost you $4,700, $5,000. I got it. So those are the type of things where don't let money stop you from engaging, because think about where you can engage and offer them a different level of value.
I agree, it's great.
And oftentimes, and I know it's the case here at the Law Center, most of our boards have different tiers of giving. So for our recent alumni who might get engaged, the giving expectation is actually much lower than some of our more mature graduates. Certain organizations will do that. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So I want to save a little bit of time for questions. So hopefully you thought of something difficult for the panel, not for me.
Come on, Marcy, fastball.
Please.
Something I was curious about is how the jobs you've had have helped or hindered your philanthropic involvement. I think Rich mentioned he was encouraged by work to kind of get involved. And Julie mentioned that, she makes her job aware she's going to have a meeting to miss it. So I was kind of curious throughout your career, is that how your job has helped or hindered that?
So within our firm, as many of you guys know, and I know there are a couple folks that are in other firms here, every employee is a salesperson. I mean, our sales force is embodied in everybody that's an employee of the firm. That said, as you get 3, 4, 5 years into your career and you take on management responsibilities, your goals and objectives go from being client-focused to being client-focused and market-focused, because we need to be bringing in new clients, and it's the lifeblood of the firm. We have a lot of fun with each other, but got to have clients to pay the bills. So there's that layered expectation that really adds to that. And it just gets ratcheted up as you go. The expectations of partners are greater than managers and so forth. But I never really focused on it because those were my goals and objectives. I always focused on it because I had fun doing it, and I needed a diversion, and I needed something that was an outlet for me to just to feel like I had a double bottom line of how I was doing at work, but also how I was doing as a person. I did have to tell you, I took about 4 years off, just as an aside, to invest in kids through coaching kids' softball teams, baseball teams, basketball teams, flag football teams, whatever my kids were doing. That was another diversion, and that's kind of why I got into junior achievement eventually, is because it was also child-focused. No greater joy came to me than being on a baseball field with a bunch of 7 or 8 year olds, teaching them about character, and they may not have been the most athletic, but they can succeed and be confident and all those kind of things. So I digress a little bit, but that was my role as a father, as much as it was a role as an audit manager at the time at the firm. So
I think in terms of how, if I'm remembering the question correctly, how did volunteering help to position sort of the workplace and the career, the job? Is that right? Where do those intersect?
It's actually, how has your job
The
helped or
reverse, yeah.
hindered? Yeah, has your
Yeah.
job encouraged you to be involved, or have they, on the opposite, been not happy when you're missing hours to be involved in philanthropy?
I mean, I think again, it's the same conversation around, if that's important to you, which I think it is, because you all here, but you need to make sure you're aligning yourself with organizations and your work finds it important and meaningful. And I work in human resources, so I can tell you that a lot of organizations, I mean, I don't know any of my clients who would not be supportive of employees getting involved in the community. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. CSR wasn't even around when we were talking about this 15 years ago, and now it's almost a criteria through which candidates evaluate whether or not to join an organization. So I think you're gonna find a way, and organizations, as long as, which I think people who want to do volunteering and people who are interested in giving back are gonna find a way to get their work done so that it doesn't hamper that. I don't think any HR person's gonna say, no, you can't go volunteer. I mean, I don't know, I could be wrong.
No, you're not wrong. I think a lot of people will say make sure your interests align to your organizations. I say make sure your organization's interests align to you. Right? So when the stuff that I do, my organization wasn't necessarily teaching in the jails and dealing with the marginalized population at that level. But if you do well at it, you're not going to drop the ball at work, and then it raises the status in that organization too, right? You do all of these type of things, and now people are like, oh, I didn't even know that existed. So now your organization will take what you like and potentially build a capability, and that was my situation, build a capability or a focus around that thing that you're doing. So a lot of times, people say follow what they want to do. I'm kind of an anarchist in that mode, and say do what you want to do, and as long as it's not detrimental to yourself, your organization, your family first, your organization, yourself, then you're all right. But because most people, HR people, they're good people. They're not going to say to you like, oh, well, you can't do this. Like
Most.
yeah, they're good people, so they're not going to tell you that you can't do something that's worthy and offering value to society writ large, right? So I think follow, whatever it is that you think that you want to do it, and they'll fall in line. As long as you're doing a good job, you're good.
I was kind of interested in what Julie might have been about to touch on, the intersection of career and.
Yeah, I must, so, thank you, Jimmy, being my memory over there. I feel like finally, so I've been on this volunteer journey for 25 years, and I finally feel like, even today, I had a board meeting this morning where I am the chair of the compensation committee, and as an HR professional, that's like awesome to be a volunteer leader of a executive board that, I'm recommending compensation and they're listening to me, and it's exciting. So to be able to actually take my professional career and apply it in a way that's meaningful for a nonprofit organization and use my toolkit in a way that means something to me it's really cool. And I think the people around the table this morning kind of valued and appreciated my perspective. And so as you all continue to grow in your careers, I think you're gonna find ways to have that impact. And when it all sort of coalesces together, it's super fulfilling. And so, that doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, it's like, oh, okay, not only do I know what I'm talking about professionally, I can actually apply it here, and I'm at the table and we're talking about interesting things, and I have something professionally to contribute that, is valued. That was fun. They listened to me and they took my recommendation, which was good.
Please.
Going off of on that, so as you know, a lot of us are pretty early in our career right now, and we probably don't know a lot about just work stuff, managing, doing certain tasks. So have you ever gotten asked by your organization to do something that you don't know how to do yet, or if you had learn something yourself because somebody else could do it?
In a volunteer capacity, is that what we're talking about? I mean, there's so many that come to mind that I'm trying to, I gotta sanitize the topic because, I think Rich and I were both involved with an organization that went through a lot of change. And there was change in the leadership, and there was change in the structure of the organization, and how how there's a lot of politics. We haven't talked, I mean, I know it's a bad word down here. We don't want to talk about politics, but there's also personalities when you're involved in any of these organizations and these agendas behind the scenes that, you know, again, I'm a pretty transparent person. So for me, I was like, why wouldn't everybody just come in here and, you know, say what they mean instead of have these, you know, 5 stories they're trying to tell. But so trying to navigate change through an organization and influence change, you really figure out what relationships you can rely on and who you can trust. And so I think during the 3 years that I was on that specific executive committee, it was an interesting time to just sort of help. Am I part of the solution? How do I figure out what the solution is? How do we drive the organization towards that? They didn't even know where they wanted to go, and we had to really sort of deal with some financial issues that were going on and right the ship there, or else there wouldn't have been an organization at all. And so it was a very tumultuous, am I telling too much? It was a very tumultuous, I didn't say the organization, right? I haven't said it yet. So anyway, there's just a lot there that you kind of have to rely on instincts and trust that there's going to be people who are going to either get on board and are going to be good leaders and you're going to support them because that's, you know, where you are, or you're going to figure out that, you know, they're not making the right choices, and then you have to figure out what to do. But yeah, no, definitely. When I got on that board, I was like, oh, I didn't see this coming, you know.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's baptism by fire. So let me tell you a story. I like telling stories. In 2014, I was on a board. I was the secretary of the board at the time. I went from teaching to volunteerism and secretary of the board, right? Then the vice chair of the board, just like, I can't do this anymore. I have too many commitments. So the executive director and the president of the board says to me, we need you to step in as a vice chair. So I didn't have any skills for this. I didn't have the knowledge yet or the experience, but I said, all right, like Richard Branson says, say yes even if you don't know how to do it, and work like hell to figure out how to make it happen. So I jumped into the vice chair role and was like, okay, let me learn this stuff organizationally. I'm going to figure things out. So I transitioned decently well, I'd imagine. Did okay. Fast forward like 6 months at work, I get moved from one project to take over another project, but I'm like the number 2 PM on the project. 59 days in, there's a huge blow up at work. Government customer consultant, argue, you're fired, leave. She walks out into the office, taps me on the back and said, this whole floor is yours, kid. Good luck. Figure it out. She walks off. Now, had that happened to me prior to my experience, just being thrown into the lake of fire at the board level, I wouldn't have had the confidence to say, I can do this, but I had already been there before. So I talked about how sometimes you can use a board to help you get the next position, or it can use you to prepare you for the next position. So for me, it was, you kind of get rattled and you get a little bit shaky, but I was like, yeah, I actually think I can do this because I just went through this 6 months prior. So it was more of a confidence booster for me to say, here is how a board can benefit you at the board level, organizational, nonprofit level, and then how that can translate back into the organization, because just because it's a nonprofit doesn't mean it's not a real business, right? You still have to run the stuff, and the same skills, the same customer relationship management, all of that type of stuff remains the same, and it's very transferable from the nonprofit to government to academia to commercial, wherever. So for me, I think that played a huge role in being able to not do something, then having the confidence to actually do it.
I guess the only thing I'd add is there really shouldn't be anything that you would be asked to do by a nonprofit that would be so far out of your comfort zone that you, one, couldn't do it, but I think you can also choose. I mean, you're a volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to be involved in finances, go work on the finance committee. If you want to be involved in bringing in new members, go work on the membership committee. They take totally different skills, but you could do either. And so, but you know, that's a great story about just being thrown into the fire, and just I have already an appreciation, I think, for the type of person CT is. Probably just said, all right, bring it on, and let, you know.
I like swimming with sharks.
Yeah, we'll get this done. I mean, the situation I think that Julie was talking about is, it brings up the aspect that these nonprofits are a business, and there are politics involved, there's interest, there's multiple members wanting ROI. And to be on that board, you have to be aware of that. In this case, we actually, because the organization was going in a direction that the members and the board didn't agree with, we fired the CEO and had to go find a new one. And that, there were allies to that CEO we fired, and we knew that going in. And, but and we basically, we found out what board members wanted the thing to survive and succeed, and which didn't. The one that didn't hopped off the ship, and we moved on, and it's yeah, or we threw, or both. So just something to be aware of.
I would add to that too. Don't ever hesitate as a volunteer or a board member to ask questions, not just for your own benefit, but also one of the responsibilities of a board member or a volunteer is to ask difficult questions of the staff. And for your own edification, but also, as that's your responsibility, which I think is exactly what you're saying. So never ever hesitate. That's your role. Right. I want to save. We have about 10 minutes, so I thought I'd save a little bit more time just for a little social. There's still food back there and everything else. I would like to thank the panel for their great advice. So thank you, guys. And the bar is still open too. So you got it.
Sorry, before everybody starts doing shots, Allison in the back has, maybe if you can bring them up, a small token of appreciation to our panelists and Jean, our moderator. And just real quick, one of the things that we did in preparing is we had a call with Jean and the panelists to kind of scope out what we wanted to talk about. And a little bit of the backstory. I mean, Julie, besides being a good friend of mine, was co-founder of this Future Fund. So, before you leave, for any of you that aren't members, hopefully by the end of the evening you will be members. But we have our two co-chairs here, as well as many other members, and please reach out to them. And, Rich, I worked for Rich at Grant Thornton for many years. I got involved with junior achievements going into those classes. And it's a pretty cool environment having, first graders, second graders look up to you like you actually know something, because my first grader does not look at me that way. And then, the one thing when I was thinking of the panel and we were talking about it, and I did, I have kind of a personal connection with all these. I wanted to make it diverse. Obviously, we have, a woman, old white guy, and a black guy on the panel, right? But kind of making some levity of it. But CT, I got to know CT from being on the leadership committee of the Future Fund. CT is not a loud talker. He doesn't talk a whole lot, but when he talks, it really resonated with me in several of the leadership committees. And just a little backdrop, when he was on kind of telling his story, he grew up in Flint, Michigan. A lot of us know the most recent thing, Flint, Michigan had a big water issue, but he kind of talks about the environment that he grew up in and just kind of his backstory. Walked on at the University of Notre Dame, made the basketball team. He's gone on to earn his doctorate degree. So great story and really somebody that I respect a whole lot, and he brings a different perspective. And I think if you look at the organizations everybody's been involved with, it's kind of shaped by their background and the environment they grew up in. And for anybody that's not involved here and came to really think about, hey, I'm thinking about it or whatever, I think to what CT said earlier, just do it. Find an organization that resonates with you, whether it's animals, whether it's financial literacy, whether it's homelessness, whatever the case may be, and just go and do it. And you start out at the lowest level, and I feel a lot of personal satisfaction when I'm out there helping. And I just want to thank the Georgetown Law School once again, Jean and Krista, for really making this possible. And hope everybody has a good evening. Please enjoy some more food and drink. Thank you.